20 acres of land in Reeves County, Texas, once sat listed for $10,998, and for the better part of a year, nobody bought it. Not because it was worthless. Because out here, in the flattest, driest, most forgotten stretch of the American map, land is the one thing nobody is short of. What West Texas is short of is people. Whole towns that once held thousands now hold dozens. Banks became storage sheds. Hotels became nothing at all. And the homes that remain, some of them, can be had for less than the cost of a used car. This is a region where the American dream of cheap land quietly came true, and almost nobody showed up to claim it. 10 towns from West Texas. Real places, real county records, real listings you can pull up right now. No filters, no exaggeration. We are counting down from the quietly declining to the genuinely stunning. So if you like wandering old archives and staring at satellite images of places most people will never drive through, go ahead and subscribe. It helps this channel keep digging up towns like these. And while you are at it, tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Let us start the countdown. Number 10. Toyah, Reeves County. The name comes from a native word meaning flowing water, a nod to the artesian springs that once made this valley worth settling in the first place. Toyah began in 1879. When a man named W.T. Youngblood arrived by covered wagon and opened a one-room adobe store to serve the ranches scattered across the valley, after first peddling goods to ranchers directly out of a tent. When the Texas and Pacific Railway pushed through a year later, Toyah became a genuine boomtown, complete with section houses, a roundhouse, and maintenance shops supporting regional cattle shipping, and by 1914 more than 1,000 residents called it home, with 4 churches, 2 banks, 2 hotels, and 2 lumber yards. For a brief stretch in the mid-1910s, the population is believed to have climbed past 1,100, making Toyah one of the liveliest stops on the entire rail line through Reeves County. Then the Great Depression hit. By 1931, the population had dropped by nearly half, down to 553 residents with only 17 businesses still operating, and it never recovered. 400 residents by the 1950s, under 200 by the 1970s, and by the 2020 census, just 61 people remained. In 2004, an 8-inch rainstorm in about 2 hours overwhelmed the town's flood dike and swept through what was left of Main Street. Today, the median age in Toyah is over 70. The school district shut its doors long ago, sending the few remaining children to Pecos, 20 miles away, and you can find raw land here for $11,000. The catch is not the price of dirt. It is what is not here. No grocery store, no clinic, nothing but a scattering of oil field trucks passing through on the highway. Number 9. Winkler County. Oil was struck in the Hendrick Field in 1926, and within a year the Wink Townsite Company was selling lots as fast as tents could go up in the pasture of a local ranch. By 1927, the population was reported at 3,500. And 2 years later it had climbed past 6,000, complete with bootlegging, gambling, and a city government so infiltrated by organized crime that a judge voided its incorporation election in 1928, forcing the town to reorganize from scratch. 5 hospitals and 15 doctors treated injured oilfield hands and expectant mothers around the clock. This is also the childhood home of Roy Orbison, who later described growing up here as nothing but football, oil fields, grease, and sand, and said he was relieved to finally leave. By 1990, the population had fallen to 1,189, and residents voted overwhelmingly. 187-5 in 1958 to pursue federal urban renewal money, believing paved streets and new curbs might save the town. Wink got its $1 million in 1960. The population kept falling anyway, down to 919 by the year 2000. One former renewal director later admitted the program had, in his own words, chased all the payrolls right out of town. Median home prices here sit in the low six figures today. In a place so hot that summer temperatures above 105 degrees are routine, and readings past 110 are recorded most years. And the catch is simple. The same oil volatility that built Wink in 18 months can gut it just as fast. And no amount of new curbing changes that math. Number 8. Loraine, Mitchell County. Loraine was platted in 1905 and grew quickly around cotton ginning and later a cheese factory that made it the regional headquarters for a dairy cooperative serving several surrounding counties. Population estimates ran as high as 1,100 through the 1950s. Supported by more than 40 retail and service businesses at its peak in the 19-teens, including a bank and a commercial club. But cotton farming consolidated, the dairy cooperative faded, and by 1986 only 6 businesses remained in operation, including a retirement center. The population has kept sliding since, down to 500 as of the most recent count, with nearly 30% of families living below the poverty line. Loraine offers some of the most startling numbers on this entire list. 2-bedroom houses have listed for well under $100,000, with recent listings appearing around $50,000, less than a new pickup truck in much of the country. And the town's per capita income has at times sat right around $12,000 a year. A strange coincidence with the number in the title of this very video. The town sits within striking distance of Abilene and the Midland-Odessa metro area, so it is not entirely isolated, but the local economy that once supported a downtown full of shops is simply gone. The catch is proximity without opportunity, close enough to commute, far enough that almost nobody wants to. Number 7. McCamey, Upton County. McCamey is a town whose name was literally painted on the side of a boxcar by its founder in 1925 after he and his partners struck oil nearby. Within 6 months, a dusty tent and frame city of 10,000 people had materialized out of open ranchland, and 7 major oil companies leased land in the surrounding fields within a year. An early Shell oil experiment tried storing 1 million barrels of crude in a massive earthen reservoir, only for the weight of the oil to crack the limestone underneath. And the whole project was abandoned by 1929. The Depression hit McCamey hard, and the population, which had once run as high as 2,500 through the late 20th century, has drifted downward for decades, sitting under 1,700 today. What makes McCamey worth watching is what it did next. Rather than disappear, it leaned into the one resource the oil bust could not take away: wind. Becoming home to some of the first commercial wind farms in the country by the 1990s and earning the nickname the wind energy capital of Texas. Longtime residents here like to point out that the town has weathered recessions, depressions, tornadoes, and every boom and bust the oil business could throw at it, and is still standing to talk about it. It is a genuine reinvention story. Listings here have appeared for under $20,000, well below the state median. The catch is that wind jobs, unlike oilfield jobs, do not need nearly as many people once the turbines are up. So the population keeps falling even as the industry itself succeeds. A town too stubborn to disappear entirely, but too thin on jobs to ever really refill. Number 6. Balmorhea, Reeves County. Balmorhea sits on top of one of the largest natural springs in Texas, a crystal-clear pool so vast that the Civilian Conservation Corps built a public swimming facility around it in the 1930s, using local limestone and adobe to preserve the spring's natural flow, and it still draws tourists and scuba divers today. You would think a town built on abundant water in the desert would only grow. Instead, Balmorhea peaked around 1,200 residents in the 1930s, when the Toyah Valley Irrigation Company, organized by the town's own founders, distributed spring water across large-scale cotton, alfalfa, and pecan farms that supported a genuinely prosperous economy and has been shrinking ever since, down to 527 by the year 2000, and to just 384 people as of the most recent estimate. The culprit was not drought. It was mechanization. As farm equipment replaced field labor and the agricultural jobs that anchored the valley simply stopped existing, springs or no springs. The average detached house here sells for around $61,000, and nearly 40% of residents live below the poverty line. The pool still draws day trippers from Midland and El Paso, but day trippers do not need houses. They need parking. The catch is one of the strangest in West Texas, a town with more water than it knows what to do with and almost no jobs to go along with it. We are exactly halfway through the countdown now, and the stories only get stranger from here, so if you have not subscribed yet, this is a good moment, and drop a comment telling me which town has surprised you most so far. Number 5. Iraan, Pecos County. Iraan was born in 1926 after oil was discovered on the ranch of Ira and Ann Yates, a couple who, according to local history, could not even pay their own mortgage until a wildcat well beneath their property changed everything. The town's name is literally a combination of their two first names, chosen through a contest that awarded the winner a town lot as a prize. The Yates field went on to become one of the largest oil discoveries in American history, eventually producing more than 1 billion barrels, and setting a record in 1929 when a single blowout released over 8,000 barrels an hour into the Pecos River, oil that had to be skimmed off the water downstream. A cartoonist working here during the boom, V.T. Hamlin, is credited with developing the earliest ideas for the newspaper comic strip Alley Oop right there in the oil field camps. And the town still keeps a small park with oversized dinosaur statues in his honor. Despite sitting next to one of the most productive oil fields in the country, Iraan's population has followed the familiar downward curve. From around 1,600 at its boom time peaked to roughly 985 today, with continued decline projected ahead. The reason is not that the oil ran out. Hydraulic fracturing actually boosted production here in the 2010s, tripling monthly output compared to the early 2000s. It is that modern drilling and extraction need a fraction of the workforce the original boom did. Median home values sit around $100,000. Modest by national standards, but well above the true bargain basement towns on this list. The catch in Iraan is mechanization dressed up as prosperity. The field keeps producing, the jobs keep shrinking, and the town keeps emptying quietly in the background of a genuine industrial success story. A smaller boomtown nearby, Red Barn, appeared even before Iraan itself, and never grew past about 75 permanent residents before it was fully abandoned in 1952. A reminder that some of these oilfield towns never even got a second chance. Number 4. Lobo, Culberson County. Lobo is not really a town anymore. It is a single real estate listing. It began in the 1850s as a stop along desert mail routes, valued for one reason. It sat above the Van Horn Wells, an aquifer that made it the only reliable water source for 100 miles in any direction. A post office opened in 1907, and the settlement was named after the wolves in the surrounding hills. Its population never topped about 100 people even at its peak, though it supported a general store and eventually a motel and grocery. The decline began in the 1950s, when the railroad abandoned its route through the area, and by 1991 the last residents had packed up and left entirely, leaving behind an empty swimming pool and a handful of quiet buildings. In 2001, 3 friends from Germany bought the entire 10-acre town site for $20,000 and spent 2 decades using it as an art and film retreat, hosting a recurring desert cinema festival and music events. In 2023, having grown too old to keep maintaining it, by their own admission, the owners listed the whole town for $100,000. Complete with a pecan orchard of more than 61,000 trees and a working campground. The listing drew interest from around the world, curious what it might mean to privately own an entire piece of Texas history. The catch with Lobo is that nobody actually lives there to be counted. An entire town, water rights and all, for less than the price of a modest house almost anywhere else in the country. Number 3. Sierra Blanca, Hudspeth County. It was here, on December 15, 1881, that the westward building Texas and Pacific Railway finally met the eastward building Southern Pacific Line, joining the country's second transcontinental railroad with a silver spike driven just outside town. For a moment, Sierra Blanca was one of the most strategically important junctions in the American West, serving as a shipping center for cattle and for salt mine nearby. That moment did not last. By the mid-1930s, the population had fallen to around 500, and it has hovered between 600 and 900 ever since, sitting around 700 today. With a poverty rate near 34%, spread across a county that is physically larger than the state of Connecticut, yet holds barely a couple thousand people total. Here is where the story turns unusual. Beginning in 1992, Sierra Blanca became host to one of the largest sewage sludge disposal operations in the world. A 91,000-acre site receiving hundreds of tons of treated waste from New York City by rail several times a week, an arrangement that briefly became national news. A few years later, state officials proposed this same isolated, low-income community as a storage site for low-level nuclear waste from power plants as far away as Maine and Vermont. Residents and environmental groups fought it for years, joined at times by officials from across the border in Chihuahua and Coahuila who worried about the nearby Rio Grande, and the plan was ultimately rejected in favor of another site, but the sludge kept coming for years afterward. Median property values sit around $60,000 today, among the lowest of any county seat in the entire state. The catch is about as specific as it gets. This is a town whose remoteness and lack of political leverage made it, for a period, the place other parts of the country sent what they did not want. Number 2. Pyote, Ward County. Pyote once had 3,500 residents during an early oil boom, then lost most of them when the railroad shifted its route to Monahans in the 1930s, dropping the population to just over 1,000 by 1931 and down to 201 by 1941. Then, in 1942, the Army Air Forces broke ground on a bomber training base just south of town, clearing rattlesnake dens to make room for 2 runways each 1.5 miles long. Servicemen nicknamed it the Rattlesnake Bomber Base. Within 4 months, it was the largest bomber installation in the entire country, and by October of 1944, more than 6,500 military personnel and civilian workers were stationed there, dwarfing the town beside it and briefly turning empty desert into one of the busiest bases in Texas. After the war, the base became a storage depot holding more than 2,000 retired aircraft, and for a period, the Enola Gay itself, the plane that dropped the first atomic bomb, sat parked in the West Texas dust here alongside General MacArthur's personal aircraft. Before the Smithsonian rescued both for preservation in the early 1950s. The base finally closed for good in 1963. Pyote's population collapsed right alongside it, and the 2020 census recorded just 72 residents. Homes here have sold for an average around $63,000 across the handful of listings that exist at any given time. The catch is almost poetic. A town that briefly held one of the most consequential aircraft in human history now sits nearly empty beside two crumbling runways in the desert. And now, number 1. Sanderson, Terrell County, the most sobering story on this entire list. Sanderson calls itself the cactus capital of Texas, and for most of its history that was a fitting, gentle nickname. Founded as a Southern Pacific Railroad division point in the early 1880s, it grew into a hub for cattle, sheep, and Angora goat ranching, and today still bills itself as the eastern gateway to the Big Bend wilderness, at one point shipping more than 1 million pounds of wool and mohair out by rail in a single year. Its population peaked at around 3,000 people in the 1950s. Then, on the night of June 10th into June 11th, 1965, a storm dropped a devastating volume of rain into Sanderson Canyon above the town. The rain hit dry ground with nowhere to go, and the floodwater built until it surged downhill into the community at a rate of nearly 15 feet per second, destroying homes, businesses, and railroad infrastructure in a matter of hours. 26 people died that morning. It remains one of the deadliest flash floods in Texas history. 11 flood control dams were built afterward to prevent a repeat, but the population never recovered, drifting from around 1,500 residents in 1980 down to roughly 640 today. In 2024, an EF3 tornado struck the town again, damaging historic buildings that had survived nearly 6 decades since the flood. And yet Sanderson is, in its own understated way, the most hopeful story on this list. Average home prices sit around $157,000, lifted by a small but real wave of outside investment. Old storefronts being converted into a music venue, a commercial kitchen, and a renovated hotel, with residents and newcomers alike betting on a slow, deliberate rebuild. The catch here is not abandonment. It is trauma layered onto isolation, a community tested by tragedy twice in living memory that has chosen, against fairly reasonable odds, to keep rebuilding rather than disappear. Block by block, storefront by storefront. So why does West Texas keep emptying out, decade after decade, town after town, even in places sitting on oil fields, natural springs, or crucial rail junctions? The pattern across all 10 of these towns is remarkably consistent. The industry that built the place, cotton, cattle, oil, water, a railroad junction, even a bomber base, eventually needed fewer people to do the same work, or needed no people here at all. What is left behind is infrastructure built for thousands, now serving dozens, and a housing stock the market has essentially given up pricing normally. Honestly, having spent a lot of time in county archives for towns like these, I did not expect the sludge story or the bomber base story to end up stranger than the oil stories. But out here, they usually are. Every one of these towns also has its own small museum, historical marker, or preservation society keeping the record straight. Run by volunteers who care a great deal about getting the details right, which made this particular research trip a genuine pleasure. Who could actually live in a place like this? Realistically, someone who works remotely, or is already retired, or is genuinely comfortable with a 40-minute drive to the nearest hospital and a grocery run that doubles as a day trip. None of the people still living in these places are relics or holdouts in any dismissive sense. They simply decided that quiet, cheap, and remote outweighed everything a larger city offers. And that is a reasonable trade for some people to make, even if it is not one most of us would choose. It is worth remembering, too, that every one of these 10 towns still has a school district, a post office, or a courthouse hanging on, run by people who never agreed to be called a ghost town and would probably push back if you called it that to their face. I would like to know what you think. Would you actually move to any of these 10 places, or is the isolation simply too much to take on? Leave it in the comments. I read every one. There are more forgotten places like these still out there, and I am already digging into the next batch. This video is for informational and historical purposes only and is not financial or investment advice. Property values change, and viewers should do their own research or consult a professional before making any purchase decisions.